Elijah cualquiera de mis hijas, criador, el jefe Apache toma una decisión sorprendente. He was a man used to the wide-open plains, a horse breeder with a keen eye for strength and beauty in every animal he encountered. But this day was different. He had heard tales of the Apache people, their skill in taming wild horses, and the rare creatures that roamed their lands. Thomas was determined to find a horse that no one had yet managed to domesticate, a horse that would prove his expertise and bring him pride in his work. As he approached the village, he noticed the simple but strong homes made of wood and adobe, clustered in harmony with the land. Smoke rose from a few hearths, signaling the start of daily routines. Children ran freely, laughing and shouting, while women carried water and food, moving with grace and efficiency. The air was filled with the scent of cooking fires and the earthy aroma of the desert. Thomas felt a mixture of awe and nervous excitement. This was a place that seemed untouched by the outside world, yet it carried a strength and dignity that he could sense immediately. He was greeted cautiously by a few villagers who stepped forward to meet him. Their eyes were sharp, alert, and curious. It was clear that visitors were rare, and an outsider arriving on horseback drew attention quickly. Thomas tipped his hat politely and spoke in calm, measured words. "Good morning. My name is Thomas. I am a horse breeder, and I have come to see the animals in your village. I seek a horse unlike any other." The villagers exchanged looks, some whispering to one another. The elders, who seemed to radiate authority without speaking a word, observed Thomas closely. Then a man of noble presence, the village leader, the Apache chief, emerged from a nearby home. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a calm, commanding gaze that made Thomas feel both respect and tension. His hair, long and dark, fell over his shoulders, and his eyes seemed to see more than just the surface. Every step he took showed wisdom and experience. "Why do you come here, stranger?" the chief asked, his voice steady but carrying weight. Thomas explained his quest for a unique horse, emphasizing his knowledge and skill as a breeder. He spoke of his years traveling the plains, studying horses, and raising animals that were admired in many towns. His words were honest and measured, but there was a hint of boldness in his tone, a confidence that came from a lifetime of experience. The chief listened silently, nodding slightly before responding. "You seek what many cannot find. Horses are not just animals here. They are part of our lives, our survival, our heritage. To ask for one is not simple, but I will see your heart as well as your hands." Thomas felt the weight of those words. He had expected resistance, perhaps skepticism, but the seriousness with which the chief spoke made him pause. This was not a place for brash actions or empty words. Respect and understanding would be necessary, or his quest could fail before it even began. As Thomas dismounted, a few children gathered nearby, curious about the stranger and his tall horse. They whispered among themselves, pointing at Thomas's clothing, his hat, and the shiny leather boots he wore. Some adults watched silently from a distance, ready to step in if needed, while others returned to their daily chores, observing discreetly. The village seemed alive with a quiet energy, a sense that everything mattered and every action was observed. It was then that Thomas made the remark that would change the mood of the village and catch everyone by surprise. Looking toward the chief and his family, he said, "If you will allow it, I would like to choose one of your daughters in return for the horse I seek. I am a man who values strong, capable women, and I believe such a partnership could benefit us both." The words hung in the air like a sudden storm. A hush fell over the village. Children froze mid-step, women paused in their work, and even the wind seemed to slow as everyone processed what Thomas had said. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly, though his face remained calm. His daughters, who had been observing quietly from a distance, exchanged glances of shock and confusion. The villagers whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others glancing at Thomas with incredulity. Thomas realized immediately that his words had caused tension. He had intended to express admiration and a desire for partnership, but in this culture, his comment carried weight far beyond what he understood. He took a careful step forward, raising his hand slightly in a gesture of respect. "I mean no disrespect," he said earnestly. "I admire your people, your strength, and your traditions. I only wish to honor that through partnership, not to impose my will." The chief studied Thomas carefully, his expression unreadable. The air was thick with expectation. Every villager present understood that the chief's response would set the tone for what could happen next. Some braced for anger or rejection, while others wondered if the stranger could somehow redeem himself. Thomas, though nervous, felt that there was a chance to prove himself beyond words. He would need to show courage, humility, and respect for the ways of the Apache. For a long moment, the chief said nothing. He walked slowly around Thomas, observing his posture, his hands, his eyes. It was as if the chief was reading not just his words, but the intentions hidden behind them. Thomas could feel the weight of generations of wisdom pressing down upon him, and he realized that no training with horses could prepare him for this moment. Here, he was being judged not for skill, but for character. Finally, the chief stopped and looked Thomas directly in the eyes. "Words are easy. Actions are what matter," he said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the village. "You will stay here for 3 days. Your hands, your heart, and your understanding will be tested. Only then will I decide whether your request can be considered." Thomas nodded solemnly. He understood that this was more than a challenge. It was a chance to prove himself as a man of honor, capable of respecting a culture he did not fully know. The villagers watched as he was led to a corral of wild horses, the creatures tossing their heads and snorting at the new presence. Thomas's heart raced with excitement and fear. These horses were untamed, and each one carried the spirit of the land. His skill would be tested in ways he had never imagined. Over the next few minutes, he began to learn the rhythm of the village. He observed the way the women moved with care, the way children learned through quiet observation, and the way every gesture carried meaning. He realized that understanding this culture required patience and humility. Every step he took, every word he spoke, would be noted and remembered. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, Thomas had started to form a tentative respect for the chief and his people. He had already seen that courage alone was not enough. To earn trust, he would need to demonstrate patience, empathy, and genuine respect. And so, as the village settled into the quiet of the evening, Thomas prepared himself for the next 3 days, knowing that his life and his quest for the perfect horse were about to become something far more complex and meaningful than he had ever anticipated. He looked toward the horizon, where the red desert met the pink glow of sunset, and whispered to himself, "I will prove myself not just for the horse, but for understanding this land and its people." The challenge had begun, and Thomas knew that nothing would ever be the same. Again, the next morning, the village was already alive with the sounds of activity before the sun had fully risen. Thomas awoke in a small tent provided by the chief, his body stiff from sleeping on the ground but his mind alert and ready for the day ahead. Outside, the soft rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds marked the beginning of a new challenge. He knew that earning the trust of the Apache people would not be simple, and today promised the first real test of his character. The chief appeared shortly after dawn, moving with calm authority. He did not speak immediately, letting Thomas take a moment to prepare himself. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying across the open space. "You will spend today learning about our ways, observing our traditions, and showing respect to all you encounter. Words alone will not impress us." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He understood that every action, no matter how small, would be noticed. As they walked together, the chief introduced Thomas to the village slowly, pointing out key elements of their daily life. Women carried water in large clay pots, moving with steady rhythm to avoid spilling a drop. Children helped by gathering kindling for fires or feeding small animals, learning responsibility through practice rather than instruction. Men tended to horses and repaired tools, their movements precise and thoughtful. Thomas noticed the subtle ways people communicated, gestures and glances carrying messages as clearly as words. The chief paused in front of a corral filled with untamed horses. Their wild eyes reflected both fear and curiosity. "These horses are our most trusted companions," the chief said. "They are not to be forced. If you hope to earn anything here, you must approach them with patience and understanding." Thomas felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. His entire life had been spent working with horses, yet these animals were unlike any he had ever encountered. They were wild in body and spirit, connected to the land in ways that no farm or ranch horse could ever be. Thomas spent the morning observing the horses, learning their habits and behaviors. He watched how the Apache men moved slowly, speaking in low tones, earning the animals' trust rather than demanding it. He tried to imitate their techniques, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. Some horses snorted and shook their heads, wary of his presence. Others edged closer, curious but cautious. It was clear that the challenge the chief had set was not simply about skill. It was about character, patience, and respect. By midday, Thomas had begun to gain the attention of some of the younger villagers. A small group of children watched him closely, fascinated by his attempts to approach the horses. Thomas smiled at them and spoke gently, introducing himself and explaining what he was trying to do. The children laughed and ran alongside him, offering small bits of advice and encouragement, showing that even the youngest members of the village were deeply connected to their traditions. Thomas realized that this was more than a physical test. It was a lesson in humility, learning to listen, observe, and adapt. The chief returned after the lunch period, accompanied by two of his daughters. They moved with quiet grace, their eyes bright and curious as they watched Thomas work. Thomas's heart skipped a beat when he realized that he was being observed not only by the chief, but also by the young women he had mentioned the day before. He reminded himself to maintain respect in every interaction, understanding that actions would speak far louder than words. "Approach them slowly," the chief instructed, pointing toward a particularly strong stallion that had resisted human contact for months. "Do not force him. Show patience and he may allow you to come closer." Thomas took a deep breath, steadying his hands and mind. He remembered the advice he had seen the villagers give each other: slow movements, gentle voice, eye contact without intimidation. Step by step, he approached the horse, speaking softly and lowering himself to appear smaller and less threatening. The stallion snorted and shook his mane, but Thomas did not move back. Instead, he sat quietly, letting the horse decide whether to approach him. Minutes passed like hours, and Thomas felt his own patience tested. Finally, the horse edged forward, sniffing Thomas's hand. A small smile appeared on Thomas's face as he realized that trust had begun to form. He did not try to mount or restrain the animal. Instead, he spent the afternoon walking alongside the horse, learning its patterns, understanding its fears, and earning its tentative confidence. As the day went on, Thomas also observed the subtler lessons the village offered. He watched how the chief spoke to his daughters, treating them with respect and care while still maintaining authority. He noticed the balance of strength and gentleness in every interaction, and how each member of the community contributed to the welfare of all. Thomas began to understand that earning the chief's trust would require more than skill with horses. It would require understanding the values, traditions, and responsibilities that shape this community. By late afternoon, the chief called Thomas to stand before him. "You have done well today, stranger," he said, his voice calm but firm. You have begun to understand what it means to respect this land and its people, but this is only the beginning. Tomorrow you will face another test, one that will challenge not only your skill but your character and your heart." Thomas nodded, eager but aware that each step forward would demand patience, humility, and careful attention. That evening, as the village settled into a quiet rhythm, Thomas reflected on the day. He had come seeking a horse, yet he realized that what he had truly encountered was a lesson in respect, culture, and human connection. Sitting near the fire, he listened to the soft hum of conversation, the gentle neighing of horses, and the laughter of children. It was a sound unlike any he had known, filled with warmth and balance, a community living in harmony with one another and the land around them. Thomas also had moments of introspection about his earlier words. He had been bold, even reckless, in suggesting marriage as part of an agreement. Now he understood that true partnership required trust, time, and respect, not a simple exchange. He promised himself that he would approach every interaction with sincerity and humility, proving through actions rather than words that he could honor the values of this community. Night fell, and the stars emerged in brilliant clarity over the desert sky. Thomas lay on a mat outside his tent, listening to the quiet whispers of the night. The challenges ahead seemed daunting, but he felt a sense of purpose growing within him. This was not just about a horse anymore. It was about learning, growth, and understanding a way of life that was deeply rooted in honor, patience, and respect. He knew that the chief's decisions, no matter how surprising or difficult, would teach him lessons he could carry for the rest of his life. When the first rays of sunlight touched the village the next morning, Thomas was ready. He greeted the day with determination, prepared to continue learning and proving himself. The chief's daughters observed him quietly, curious to see how he would face the challenges ahead. Thomas felt a sense of anticipation mixed with nervousness, knowing that the coming days would test not only his abilities but his heart and intentions. The chief approached him once more, this time with a serious expression. "Today," he said, "you will begin to understand what it means to live among us, to earn trust, and to show your character. You must be patient, humble, and respectful in every action. Only then will you understand what you seek." Thomas nodded, feeling both the weight and the honor of the challenge. He spent the day working alongside the villagers, learning their methods for caring for horses, gathering food, and understanding the delicate balance of life in the desert. Every moment required attention and care, and Thomas began to feel a deep respect for the wisdom passed down through generations. He realized that earning the chief's trust and the acceptance of his daughters would not come from words, courage alone, or skill with horses. It would come from understanding, empathy, and consistent respect. By sunset, Thomas had begun to form connections with the villagers. The chief watched closely, the daughters observing quietly but with curiosity. Thomas understood that each moment was part of a larger test, one that would shape not only the outcome of his quest, but his own understanding of life, culture, and human connection. As the village prepared for the night, Thomas felt a sense of hope mixed with humility. He was not just an outsider seeking a prize. He was a student of a people whose strength and wisdom demanded respect and understanding. And so, as the stars emerged once more over the desert, Thomas rested with a sense of purpose, ready to face the challenges of the next day. He had learned much already, yet he knew the true test was still to come. The chief's decision remained unknown, and Thomas understood that every choice, every action would carry meaning far beyond what he had ever imagined. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, signaling the start of Thomas's third day in the village. He had already learned much about the people, their customs, and the horses, but today promised to be a greater challenge. The chief had told him that this day would test not only his skill and patience, but also his understanding, respect, and courage. Thomas felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness as he prepared for what lay ahead. The chief met him outside the small tent where he had slept, his face calm but serious. "Today, you will work with the wildest of our horses," he said. "They have never allowed anyone to come close. If you can gain their trust, even in part, it will show your dedication and character. Remember, this is not about control but understanding." Thomas nodded, his hands tightening slightly on the straps of his satchel. He knew that this was the true test, the moment where his patience and humility would be measured. As they approached the corral, Thomas saw the horses. They were magnificent creatures, their coats shiny in the morning sun, muscles rippling with strength and grace. Yet their eyes reflected suspicion, fear, and independence. Some of the horses pawed at the ground, tossing their heads high, while others edged away from him as he approached. Thomas took a deep breath, recalling the lessons from the previous days: slow movements, gentle voice, and calm presence. He lowered himself to the ground slightly, showing that he meant no harm. The chief's daughters watched from a distance, their expressions serious but curious. Thomas could feel their eyes on him, noticing every action, every hesitation, and every small success. He reminded himself to stay calm, to let the horses come to him rather than forcing any interaction. This was a lesson in respect, not conquest, and he wanted to honor the trust the chief was giving him. Hours passed as Thomas worked with the horses, each moment requiring careful attention. One horse, a chestnut stallion with fiery eyes, proved particularly difficult. He snorted and stomped, backing away whenever Thomas approached. Others watched with wary curiosity, yet none challenged him directly. Thomas realized that he needed to connect with the stallion in a way that showed understanding rather than dominance. He spoke softly, slowly moving closer, allowing the horse to decide when to trust him. Minutes turned into hours, and Thomas's patience was tested as the stallion refused to budge. During breaks, the chief observed silently, sometimes offering a nod or a slight smile, other times remaining neutral. Thomas began to understand that the chief was not just testing his skill with horses, but also his reaction to frustration and difficulty. Would he become angry or impatient, or would he remain calm and continue to show respect? Thomas chose the latter, focusing on breathing steadily and maintaining a gentle presence, even when progress seemed almost impossible. The young women approached more closely during the late morning, offering small pieces of advice. "Move slowly," one whispered, "and let him see your eyes. Do not rush." Thomas nodded, grateful for the guidance, understanding that this was not merely instruction but also an insight into the subtle ways of the village. He began to notice patterns in the horses' movements, small signals that revealed fear, curiosity, or willingness to accept trust. Every gesture, every glance became a part of a larger conversation between human and animal. By midday, Thomas had made a small breakthrough. The fiery chestnut stallion, after hours of careful observation and gentle gestures, allowed Thomas to touch his muzzle. A small but significant step, and Thomas felt a surge of relief and excitement. Yet he knew that this was only the beginning. The chief's test was not about a single moment of success, but about sustained effort, understanding, and care over time. Thomas continued to work with the stallion, walking alongside him, speaking softly and rewarding even the smallest gestures of trust. During a brief rest in the shade of a large tree, Thomas observed the daily life of the village around him. Children played and learned simultaneously, carrying small bundles of kindling or helping with chores, their actions teaching responsibility and patience. Women moved gracefully, attending to food preparation and daily tasks, their movements reflecting years of learned skill and wisdom. Men worked with the horses, repairing saddles, checking hooves, and communicating silently with the animals. Thomas realized that every aspect of this life required attention, balance, and respect, a lesson far beyond what he had expected when he arrived seeking a horse. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Thomas was called to accompany the chief on a walk through the surrounding land. The chief pointed out various plants, explaining their uses for food, medicine, and shelter. He spoke of the importance of understanding the land, the seasons, and the animals that lived upon it. Thomas listened intently, realizing that the chief's challenge was not simply about his ability to handle horses, but about his willingness to immerse himself in the life and values of the community. During the walk, the chief stopped by a small spring, its water clear and cold. He gestured for Thomas to drink and then spoke quietly. "A strong heart and steady hands are important, but so is understanding. Respect is shown not only to others but to life itself. Learn this and you will earn more than you expect." Thomas drank deeply, feeling the refreshing water and the weight of the words. He understood that the true test was not immediate but gradual, measured by his consistency, patience, and openness to learning. Returning to the corral in the late afternoon, Thomas resumed working with the horses. By now, several of the animals were allowing him closer, and the chestnut stallion had begun to follow him calmly as he moved. Other villagers, including some elders, watched silently, their faces showing interest but little emotion. Thomas felt both pride and humility, knowing that trust had to be earned and maintained through ongoing respect and care. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Thomas noticed the chief's daughters standing nearby, observing quietly. Their expressions were serious but not unkind. Thomas realized that they too were evaluating him, not only his skill with the horses, but also his demeanor, respect, and patience. He reminded himself to remain sincere, understanding that appearances alone would not be enough to earn their respect or approval. By evening, Thomas had spent nearly 12 hours with the horses, the chief, and the villagers. The day had been exhausting, yet he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The fiery stallion, once so untouchable, now allowed Thomas to walk beside him and even accept gentle strokes along his neck. It was a small victory, but it symbolized the larger lessons he had learned about patience, humility, and understanding. The chief approached as the villagers began to settle down for the night. "You have shown progress today," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You are beginning to understand the ways of this land and our people. Tomorrow, your challenge will become more personal. You will face tests that go beyond skill with horses. Your character, your courage, and your respect for others will be examined." Thomas nodded, knowing that each day brought lessons far beyond what he had expected when he first arrived. That night, Thomas sat near the fire outside his tent, reflecting on the day. He had learned that strength and skill were only part of the equation. True understanding required observation, humility, and the ability to respond thoughtfully to every situation. He realized that the chief's tests were designed to teach these lessons gradually, allowing him to earn respect step by step rather than demanding it outright. As the stars appeared in the desert sky, Thomas felt a quiet determination growing within him. He understood that his journey had shifted from seeking a horse to learning a way of life, a philosophy of respect, patience, and harmony with others. The chief's daughters, the villagers, and even the horses had begun to teach him lessons that could not be learned anywhere else. Each moment, each gesture, and each decision mattered, shaping the person he was becoming. By the time sleep claimed him, Thomas felt a sense of calm and purpose he had never known before. The challenges were far from over, but he understood that the lessons of today would guide him through tomorrow. He would continue to work with patience, humility, and respect, knowing that true achievement lay not in possession but in understanding. As he closed his eyes, Thomas whispered to himself, "I will earn their trust not by force but by honor. I will learn and I will grow." The desert night wrapped around the village, and the horses moved quietly in the corral, their trust slowly building alongside his. Tomorrow promised another test, and Thomas was ready to face it, strengthened by the lessons of this day and the hope of what was yet to come. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of the desert and the soft aroma of smoke from early cooking fires. Thomas rose with determination, knowing that today would mark a turning point. He had spent 3 full days learning, observing, and proving himself through patience, respect, and understanding. Now he felt the weight of anticipation more than ever. Today, the chief would make a decision, one that could change the course of his life forever. When Thomas emerged from his small tent, he found the chief waiting, accompanied by a few elders and his daughters. The sun cast long shadows across the village, and a quiet tension filled the air. Villagers paused in their morning routines, sensing that something important was about to happen. Thomas's heart beat rapidly, not out of fear, but from the awareness that the lessons of the past days had all led to this moment. The chief spoke first, his voice calm yet commanding. "Thomas, you have spent 3 days in our village. You have shown patience, humility, and a willingness to learn. You have gained the trust of some of our horses and begun to understand our ways. But your journey is not complete. Today, you will face the final test, one that will reveal the true measure of your character." Thomas listened carefully, nodding. He understood that this test would go beyond his skill with horses. It would examine his integrity, respect for the people, and his understanding of what it truly meant to belong, even temporarily, to their community. He was ready to face whatever challenge the chief set before him. The chief led Thomas to an open clearing where the villagers had gathered. Children sat quietly, their eyes wide with curiosity, while adults watched from a respectful distance. The chief turned to Thomas and spoke with deliberate calm. "You have asked for a horse, and previously you spoke of choosing one of my daughters. That request surprised us all. Today I will make my decision, but you must understand that respect, trust, and understanding cannot be demanded. They must be earned." Thomas bowed slightly, acknowledging the chief's wisdom. He felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. He had come seeking a horse, but now he realized that what truly mattered was the respect and trust he had earned. The chief continued, "I will not simply grant your request because of bold words or skill alone. You will have the opportunity to demonstrate your sincerity and dedication in a way that matters far more than a single transaction." With a sweeping gesture, the chief invited Thomas and his daughters to participate in a demonstration of care and trust with the horses. The villagers watched as Thomas gently approached the wildest stallion in the corral, speaking softly and moving with deliberate calm. The chestnut stallion, which had resisted Thomas's approach the previous day, now stood quietly nearby, accepting his gentle guidance. The chief's daughters observed closely, noting not only the calm demeanor but also the genuine respect in Thomas's actions. After the demonstration, the chief addressed Thomas directly. "Your patience and understanding have been evident. But now you must show how you will live among us, how you will honor our ways, and how you will respect the choices of others, not just your own desires. True respect is not earned through a single act, but through consistent behavior, humility, and heart." Thomas understood the depth of these words. He realized that the challenge was no longer about horses or even physical skill. It was about integrity, honor, and his willingness to place the values of the community above his personal wishes. He thought back to the bold words he had spoken on the first day and felt a quiet humility. His journey had transformed from seeking a prize into a lesson in understanding and genuine connection. The chief's daughters stepped forward, speaking carefully and respectfully. "Thomas," one said, "we have watched your efforts, your patience, and your dedication. You have shown respect for our people, our traditions, and our animals. Your words are backed by actions, and your character is evident." Thomas felt a deep sense of relief and gratitude, but he remained composed, understanding that true respect was still required, and that humility was a part of this final step. The chief raised his hand, silencing the village. His gaze swept across Thomas, his daughters, and the gathered villagers. "We have watched you closely, Thomas. You have earned respect through patience, understanding, and courage. Yet respect cannot be forced, and decisions cannot be taken lightly. Therefore, I have made a choice, not one based on exchange, but one based on freedom, honor, and heart." A hush fell over the clearing. Thomas's heart raced as he awaited the chief's words. The villagers leaned forward, sensing that a significant moment was unfolding. The chief continued, "You will not simply choose one of my daughters, nor will she be given to you as part of a transaction. Instead, you are free to earn her trust and friendship through sincere actions, patience, and respect. Love and partnership must grow naturally, not be demanded." Thomas felt a mixture of relief, surprise, and admiration. This decision was not only wise, but it reflected the deep understanding and values of the chief. It was a lesson that courage and skill alone could not grant the rewards of trust and respect. Instead, integrity, humility, and genuine care were the foundations of meaningful connections. The chief's daughters smiled, their expressions gentle but confident. "We will watch your actions, Thomas," one said. "Your sincerity and respect will guide the relationship. It is up to you to demonstrate understanding, patience, and honesty, as these are the true measures of a person." Thomas nodded, understanding that this was an opportunity that transcended the initial request. He felt a profound respect for the chief and his daughters, realizing that the experience had taught him lessons that would last a lifetime. The villagers reacted with quiet approval, some nodding and smiling, others murmuring softly. Thomas felt a deep sense of belonging, even as an outsider. He had come seeking a horse, but what he had gained was far more valuable: the respect of a community, the trust of its people, and the opportunity to form meaningful connections based on integrity and sincerity. The chief addressed the village, sharing the story of Thomas's efforts and the lessons learned. He explained how the tests had measured not only skill with horses, but also patience, respect, and character. The villagers listened intently, understanding that this moment was more than a decision. It was a demonstration of wisdom, fairness, and the values that guided their community. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Thomas walked among the villagers, his heart light but his mind full of reflection. He had earned respect through actions, understanding, and humility. The chestnut stallion walked calmly beside him, a symbol of the trust he had built. Children laughed as they watched him interact with the animals, women offered gentle smiles, and the chief observed quietly, his expression showing approval and pride. That evening, Thomas sat near the fire outside his tent, reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about the chief's words, the lessons of patience and humility, and the importance of respect in every interaction. He realized that the journey had changed him profoundly. What had begun as a simple quest for a horse had become an education in character, integrity, and the meaning of genuine connection. Thomas also reflected on the chief's decision, understanding that it was both surprising and fair. Rather than giving him what he initially sought through bold words, the chief had taught him that true respect and trust could only be earned. He felt grateful for the opportunity and committed himself to continue acting with humility and sincerity in every interaction with the villagers and the chief's daughters. As night fell over the desert, Thomas gazed at the stars, feeling a sense of peace and determination. The chief's surprising decision had taught him that life's most valuable rewards are not demanded or taken. They are earned through integrity, patience, and respect. Thomas felt a renewed commitment to his journey, knowing that the next days would require continued dedication, care, and understanding. He whispered to himself, "I will honor their trust, respect their ways, and continue to grow." This is more than a test. It is a lesson I will carry for the rest of my life. The desert night was quiet, the horses resting peacefully, and the village settled under the blanket of stars. Thomas knew that he had crossed a threshold, moving from an outsider seeking a prize to someone learning to live with integrity, humility, and genuine respect for others. The chief approached quietly, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You have begun to understand what it means to belong, even as a guest," he said. "Your journey is far from over, but you have taken the most important step. Continue to act with honor, patience, and respect, and you will earn what is truly valuable." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight and wisdom of the chief's words. He understood that today's events were not just a resolution, they were a foundation for the life he was beginning to build in this community. As Thomas lay down that night, the lessons of the day played over and over in his mind. He had faced challenges that tested his patience, humility, and courage. He had learned that respect could not be demanded, trust could not be forced, and meaningful connections required consistent care and sincerity. The chief's surprising decision had taught him more about life than any horse or journey ever could. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight, he rested with a heart full of gratitude and a mind focused on integrity, ready to continue proving himself through actions rather than words, and to build bonds that could last a lifetime. The morning sun rose over the desert, casting a warm golden glow on the small Apache village. Thomas awoke with a sense of purpose. The challenges of the past days had changed him. He no longer saw his journey as merely finding a horse or impressing the chief. It had become a deeper lesson about respect, patience, and understanding. Today, he would continue to prove himself through consistent actions, showing that the lessons he had learned were genuine and lasting. After a simple breakfast of bread and roasted corn, Thomas joined the villagers outside. The chief approached, his expression calm but full of quiet authority. "Today," he said, "you will continue to work with our horses, but you will also spend time with our people. Observe, listen, and show respect in every action. True trust is earned not only with animals but with human hearts as well." Thomas nodded. He understood that this was the final stage of his test, a day that would combine skill, character, and humility. The first part of the morning was spent in the corral, tending to the horses. Thomas moved slowly and deliberately, speaking softly and watching each animal carefully. The chestnut stallion that had once resisted him now walked calmly by his side. He stroked its mane gently, feeling the bond that had grown over days of patience and understanding. Other horses, too, began to approach him willingly, recognizing that he meant no harm. The villagers watched silently, noting how Thomas interacted with the animals not out of desire for control, but out of genuine care and respect. As the morning passed, Thomas was invited to help with other tasks in the village. He carried water, helped with the preparation of food, and even assisted some of the children in learning basic chores. The chief's daughters observed closely, seeing how Thomas treated each person with courtesy and respect, listening carefully and following instructions without complaint. Thomas realized that these small actions, though simple, were the foundation of trust and connection within the community. During a brief rest under the shade of a large tree, one of the daughters spoke softly to him. "You have learned much in these days," she said. "But understanding takes more than observation. It is shown through consistent action, through care, and through thoughtfulness in even the smallest deeds." Thomas nodded, grateful for her words. He understood that this was not a moment for pride, but a reminder that respect and understanding required ongoing effort. The afternoon brought a new challenge. The chief requested that Thomas lead a group of horses to a nearby pasture. The terrain was rocky and uneven, and some of the horses were still cautious of human guidance. Thomas remembered the lessons from the previous days: patience, calm movements, and gentle communication. He approached each horse slowly, allowing them to follow at their own pace, speaking softly and rewarding every step of trust. The chief and his daughters followed at a distance, watching intently as Thomas guided the animals safely to the pasture. Once the horses were settled, the chief spoke to Thomas with quiet approval. "You have shown skill, patience, and respect, but now it is time to focus on relationships with people. True connection is built not on authority or demand, but on trust, kindness, and sincerity." Thomas listened carefully. He understood that this was the final stage of his journey, to build meaningful bonds with the people of the village, especially the chief's family. Thomas spent the rest of the afternoon sharing stories and learning from the villagers. He asked about their daily lives, their traditions, and the ways they cared for the land and animals. He listened carefully, showing interest and respect, and the villagers responded with warmth and openness. Children laughed as he joined them in small games, and the chief's daughters offered gentle guidance as he learned new skills. Each interaction reinforced the lessons he had been learning. Humility, respect, and understanding were as important as courage or skill. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the chief gathered the village together. The air was filled with quiet anticipation. Thomas stood respectfully alongside the chief's daughters and a few elders. The chief's expression was calm, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He spoke clearly and deliberately, addressing the entire village. "Thomas has spent these days learning our ways, showing patience, humility, and respect. He has earned trust not through words, but through consistent actions. He has shown that he understands the values that guide us, and for that, he is honored as a friend and ally of this village." A quiet murmur of approval spread through the villagers. Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the chief's words, but also for the trust and warmth shown by the entire community. He realized that he had gained something far more valuable than a horse or a simple reward. He had become a part of their lives, welcomed not as an outsider, but as someone who had learned to honor their culture and values. Later that evening, Thomas and the chief's daughters walked together through the village. The conversation was light, yet filled with respect and curiosity. They spoke of daily life, the lessons of the past days, and the values that guided their actions. Thomas realized that he was no longer simply a visitor. He was a student of the land, its people, and its wisdom. The chief's daughters had grown to respect his sincerity, humility, and care, and Thomas, in turn, admired their intelligence, kindness, and strength. As night fell, the village gathered around a large fire. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and laughter filled the air. Thomas felt a profound sense of belonging. He had come seeking a horse, yet what he had truly found was a community, a set of values and connections that transcended his original purpose. The chief approached him quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have shown that true understanding comes from patience, respect, and integrity. You have earned your place here, and that is more valuable than any horse or prize." Thomas bowed respectfully, feeling the depth of the chief's words. He had learned that courage and skill were only part of the journey. What mattered most was the ability to act with integrity, to show respect in every action, and to build trust through consistent, sincere effort. The chief's decision had allowed him the freedom to earn relationships based on honor and understanding, rather than mere desire or ambition. Over the following days, Thomas continued to live alongside the village, deepening his bonds with the people and learning even more about their traditions. He worked with the horses, assisted with daily tasks, and shared stories from his own life. The chief's daughters became his friends and guides, helping him understand subtle lessons and cultural nuances. Through these interactions, Thomas grew not only as a horse breeder and traveler, but as a person, gaining wisdom, humility, and a deeper sense of respect for others. Eventually, the villagers fully embraced Thomas as one of their own. He was no longer an outsider, but a friend, helper, and trusted companion. The chief's surprising decision had allowed for genuine connections to form, based on mutual respect and understanding rather than simple exchange. Thomas realized that this was the true reward: relationships and trust earned through consistent action and sincerity. One evening, as the desert sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Thomas stood beside the chestnut stallion that had first tested him. He gently stroked the horse's mane, feeling the deep bond that had grown over days of patience and care. The chief's daughters approached, smiling warmly. Thomas understood that trust, respect, and understanding were the foundation of all meaningful relationships, whether with humans or animals. As the village settled for the night, Thomas reflected on his journey. He had arrived seeking a horse, but he had gained so much more: knowledge, wisdom, friendship, and the respect of a community. He had learned that true connections could not be demanded or forced. They were earned through humility, integrity, and consistent care. The lessons of the chief and his daughters would stay with him forever, guiding his actions and shaping the person he had become. Finally, as the stars twinkled above the desert, Thomas whispered to himself, "I came for a horse, but I have found something far greater." Respect, trust, and understanding are the treasures that truly last. The village slept peacefully under the night sky, the horses resting calmly, and Thomas felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had reached its conclusion, but the lessons and connections he had formed would continue to grow for the rest of his life. The chief approached once more, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Remember," he said, "what you have learned here is more important than any prize. Trust and respect are earned through actions, patience, and sincerity. Carry these lessons with you, and they will guide you always." Thomas nodded, feeling the truth of the chief's words deep in his heart. He had not only found a place in the village, but had also discovered the value of humility, honor, and genuine connection. As he lay beneath the stars that night, Thomas felt at peace. The challenges, tests, and lessons of the past days had transformed him. He had learned that courage and skill were not enough without respect, integrity, and patience. He had formed bonds that could never be broken and had earned the trust of a people who had welcomed him not for what he could give, but for the sincerity of his heart. The desert was quiet, the horses calm, and the village settled under a blanket of stars. Thomas knew that he had found something far more meaningful than he had ever imagined: a life guided by respect, understanding, and integrity, and relationships built on trust and care. His journey had begun with a desire for a horse, but it had led him to a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be part of a community, to honor traditions, and to act with genuine character.